Let's see. Now, I was back when I was born in Tallulah, Louisiana, but outside Tallulah, Louisiana, a place called Omega, which was really a plantation. So I'm really part of a sharecroppers family. I was born and raised on a plantation, and from Omega moved to outside of Shreveport to another plantation, the Myers, and where I was until about 9 years of age. And then I had was suffering from tuberculosis in the spinal, which is a rare type of tuberculosis pieces. So I had to go to the Shriners Hospital, and I got there through a relationship with the plantation owners and my aunt who worked at the Shriners Hospital. And I remember that very well, is because I was on the only black kid there in the Shriners at the time is. And so we were segregated. I was segregated out. Then later was joined by another young black male at the Shriners. And so we were together for a period of time. So I was there for about 1.5 years. And then when I came out, my parents had moved to Shreveport, Louisiana, into the city part. It's called Cedar Grove, grandparents, and I lived with them. And so from there to Hollywood, and then to later Blessed Sacrament Elementary School in Shreveport. And then we went to moved there to a boarding school, Holy Rose Institute in Lafayette. And then went to Southern University Lab School, lived with my aunt. So I moved around a lot in the younger days. And so what's significant about this began to be a turning point, I guess, in my life to moving toward the civil rights movement, which was more like, I put it as fate to a large extent, because I didn't grow up with this burning desire. A lot of people talk about freedom and stuff. I mean, to move from the plantation to history, that was like, okay, I'm getting a little freedom. So we didn't have, when I grew up with there were no lights, no electric lights, nothing like that. So my first experience of living in a place with electric lights is when I went to the hospital. And so my first home, when I got to Shreveport, we did not have, there was electric lights, but there was no running, no sewage and stuff is there. So that was my first experience there, I guess, as you might say, with my grandmother, and was at that house on 79th Street. So this is my first experience around protests. And so it was a dirt road, and they had cut off where the sewage and stuff running was a few blocks away where the white neighborhood ended and the black neighborhood started. And so my grandmother was wanting to, felt that, went down to try to speak about getting the sewage in. And so she kept raising hell with the city. And so soon they came out and said, okay, do that but you have to dig the ditch yourself, running water and for sewage. And so she was like, okay, first of all, there were some people lived on the street and around the neighborhood. So the idea is, how do you get them to organize them to do this? So finally she got the men and women to do it, because the men worked during the day. They came home, they were tired. And so they organized to dig the ditch, for the sewage and stuff is there. And so the women, I'll never forget that, because the women cooked together. The community thing is, the men got off of work, they would dig some of the ditches, and they would do the food. It's called communal, from house to house kind of thing. And so when they finished, my grandmother goes down and said, we finished, came down. So the inspectors came down, although they did exactly what they told them, because they had marked it off. I'll never forget the guy when he came down there, because you saw a laugh like they said, well, this is great, you did a great job, this was on the wrong side. So you now got to do it on the other side. So here's what's really was the organizing piece, because I watched my grandmother, and everybody in the neighborhood gave up. That was it, And so her thing was, okay, no. And so she would get out there in a chair in the front of this house by the ditch, and she would sing. And even when the men get off work, she'd be out there singing, And it was tough for me because the kids, everybody thought she was crazy, including me. And she would sing. And so one day I remember Mr. Jack came by and said, Miss Bessie, her name was Bessie Perry. He said, Miss Bessie, if I would help you start digging this ditch, will you stop singing? So she said, sure, that's a deal. And I'll fix food. And so he started, the other men saw him working, they started, then they redid the ditch. And then they went down. This time though, she didn't go down to ask them to come down. She went down there, but she took some of the other people, where most of the women went, and they went down there to bring them back and say, we finished the ditches. So that was my first experience about protests.
How old were you?
I was to be about, let's see, I had to come out of the hospital, about 10, 11 years old, or 11, maybe 12, 11 to 12 years old, something like that. Somewhere between 10 and 12. I could probably pick up what the exact date was, but I have to think through that. And I came out.
10, 11, or 12 is close.
Yeah, that's good. That's a long time ago. I'm going on 78 now. It's 60 years. 7 years on that. So that was my first experience, but I didn't connect. The next connection was, I do know this much, it was before Emmett Till was killed. Because then my next move around this was an organized understanding it. Although when I was on the plantation, I heard discussions of the people there about lynchings and killing of black people. But the people protected the children from this. These are things you whispered about, you might overhear, because you didn't have thick walls in the house lived in at that time. And I remember where we lived and all that, growing up. But here was the Emmett Till case was really hit home more because, one of the things we had at that time, I recall, is that I didn't know who my father, for instance. So I came up in a single parent home with grandparents and mom or whatever, and moved from place to place. But growing up, the children were the children of the community. So everybody looked out. So I had a lot of fathers. So if you did something wrong down the street, up the wrong corn row, if you want to call it, depending on where you were, you got it. And everybody had the right to chastise the children for doing something wrong, because they looked at them as being the children. And this carries on over to talk about this, how the question always with me is, why did people so open up to accept the people, Freedom Summer, and the kids coming in during the civil rights movement, the whole extended family. So the extended family was very strong in the black community. That was our survival and everything. So going back to Emmett Till, what happened is the black men gathered together all the black boys, all the young guys. And we went through this whole thing is what to do, not to do in survival. You don't look a white woman in the face. You don't do stuff like this. Black men, and it was really about survival. You cross the street, you avoid it. It was a question of how to avoid. I remember those meetings the men would have them in the churches, wherever you have is. Now the men came to those meetings to tell the boys what to do, but I remember very well, they were very well armed. That was another thing about it. It was all the homes, my grandparents, everybody was always armed. They were that, as docile as people try to project people to be. So that was my next kind of exposure in terms of, getting a bunch more of a pieces. And there was, I came up in a very segregated time, communities, going back as far to school is, buses in the back, you had to sit in the back of the bus. And I had this third experience of that piece is around that time was one day I was on the bus and my grandmother, who was very light-skinned, but she gets on the bus. So all those kids, we stacked in the back here, and the front of the bus was about empty. And she got on the bus because she was coming from work. Because part of something what she did, a lot of her work was as domestic, cooking and stuff in white kitchens and stuff. And so she gets on the bus, and she sees me. She says, "Sonny, what you doing? Come on up here and sit." Because she sat right behind the bus driver. And she said, come on up here. There's some seats up here. And I wouldn't go. I'm scared, wait a minute, here goes my grandmother again. So she goes again and says, hey boy, come on up here. I don't move. She doesn't say anything. So the bus goes to the end of the line. We live further with the end of the line. You get off there. I had another about 8 blocks to walk to where we live. So when I got off the buses, it was really called a trolley in Shreveport. And so when I got off, my grandma was waiting for me there, and she just smacked me, pow, right beside the head. And she looked at me and said, boy, don't you ever disobey me again. She never talked about protests, anything like that. She said, boy, don't you ever disobey me again. I told you to come sit up next to me. And so that was a very powerful piece to me that I didn't understand what it all meant until much later in life is, but that's the way she was. I mean, but she was not afraid of, this whole thing about survival would be habits. But she did her own way of protests in her own way, in different times and pieces that I did not understand. So back to the other pieces, getting into the movement pieces, then I'm in Baton Rouge and I go to this school, this high school in my senior year.
The public high school?
Right, Southern Universal Lab School is. And so I'm played basketball, and I'm on the team with the kiddies. And so one of my best friends was there, So this was in 1960, graduating. I was a little bit behind because going to hospital. And so they have the, at the same time as Southern University is students are doing the second walkout, coming out of, their first walkout. And so part of that leadership was by this guy, Ed Brown. And so he looks over and he sees them because the guy I'm standing next to is his brother, Hubert. And so he tells her, hey, well, come on, join us, And so we wait. So he would not go to his house and we play basketball. We don't get involved with this stuff and all this. And so I end up there, come back and everything else is. And so then that goes on by. So then I get into a lot of things happen to me. I graduate and I end up with a scholarship to go to Dillard University. So when I get to Dillard University, there are students who are in jail.
This is what year?
This was in 1960.
Okay.
So I graduated in May of 1960. I go to Dillard in September 1960. And so there's from Dillard University, there's a guy in jail, Cecil Carter. And from Xavier University, that was Rudy Lombard. From Southern University of New Orleans was Oretha Castle. And then there was Danny Finch from Tulane, I think, Loyola, Tulane University is. There's one other person in jail. So I got there, everybody was uproar about, being in jail and everything else. And I'm like, oh, I don't have anything to do with this stuff is. So the kids decided, I want to be an electrical engineer because now I'm the first kid in my family to even graduate from high school. Mm-hmm. So we've hustled around this, and I've left a lot out in terms of life, what's going on. Life is, but then I'm getting this, I've got my opportunity. So I'm going to be an electrical engineer based upon my experiences when I was in high school. And I really wanted to do this. And so I was involved in the movement. And so one day around, I think it was October of 1960. It would have been October 1959. I went to school in 59, 60. Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm sorry. Yeah. No, that's what I'm right. 60. Say October 60. And so I'm walking through college campuses, and there was this crowd of kids around the flagpole. So this young lady who's there, and she's up there speaking. And so I'm walking by. I don't have anything to do with this. So wait a minute. So I turn around and go back to talk to her. Her name was Doris Castle. She was the sister of Oretha Castle, who was the icon of the civil rights movement in New Orleans, Louisiana. In fact, there's a street named after Oretha Castle, Haley Boulevard. And so I'll go back, I wasn't interested in what she was talking about, but she was a very attractive woman. So I'll go back to get a talk to her. And so so trying to get a date with her, and she talked me into going to a core meeting. All right. And so I decided to go to this core meeting, and I go there. And I'm not going to get involved with this thing and anything else like this is, but but she wouldn't go out with me because the next step, was the fact is that was after I go to the meeting, now they were doing sit-ins and stuff. So she said, if you want to date me, you got to go sit in and do something, show me you, man. And so they were doing a thing called hit and runs. And the hit and runs was similar like you go to the lunch counter, you sit in, and when the police on Saturdays, so that was to try to do an effective boycott without getting arrested. And so there you go sit in, and so the police will all come. It's on a Saturday, busy day. The cops all downtown on Canal Street, coming into the places. They shut it down. They shut down the lunch counter and stuff like that. So you got a disruption, but the cops tell you to move on. You get up and move on.
We're in New Orleans, right?
We're in New Orleans now, yeah. That's where Dillon University is in New Orleans. And so so I'm saying, after a few meetings and stuff, I said, well, this looks like it's pretty safe, because I want this date because I'm still trying to deal with Doris. And so I decided, I told her, I'm going to go. You going to go out with me? She says, yes, I'm going to go. All right. So I put on my little shirt and tie that Saturday, and I go down. And we go to the lunch counter, we sit in, and the cops come in and say, and they said, everybody's under arrest. And I'm like, wait a minute. Whoa, that's not the way this is supposed to go. So I began to try to explain to the cops, look, this is not the way this goes. You let everybody else go, the weeks before. I said, I want to go. I can't go to jail, blah, blah, blah. So make a long story short, I'm the only one who gets, everybody got charged with trespassing. But I got charged with trespass and resisting arrest because I'm trying to insist that you can't arrest me because you didn't arrest me. So that's my first arrest, going to jail and stuff. And I spent a whole week in jail. So the significance, and now I'm getting hooked, but first of all, I'm angry, not because the fact is that I was arrested, but I was, discrimination, but it's more of that. You treated me differently. You're supposed to let me go, let other people go. It was crazy, insane, right? And so at any rate, that was my first arrest in jail. And so that led into, after that came into while I was in jail, moving through this is, there was plans being made by CORE to developing the Freedom Rides, starting in D.C. So the New Orleans core chapter was supposed to be the host. That is, the ride was supposed to begin in Washington, D.C. It's supposed to end in New Orleans, Louisiana. And so I'm caught in this thing is, but one of the things where the meetings were being held for CORE, they were being held at Aretha's Castle's house, which was only 3 blocks from Dookie Chase, which is a famous black restaurant in New Orleans. You might have heard of Dookie Chase. And so Aretha's mother worked at Dookie Chase. So Leah Chase and Mr. Dookie and Leah Chase, who owned Dookie Chase, their contribution to the movement, they would feed to people. So when they had the meetings, they would send over food from Dookie Chase. Well, being on the campus, I loved, one of the things that brought me to the meetings, besides Doris, of course, was all this great food coming from that Dookie Chase. And so anyway, they got to this thing is about the Freedom Rides coming in. And so the question now is whether or not we would, what CORE would do in preparation for this. So I'm going to school, I'm back in school, good. Because when I got arrested, I was in jail for a whole week. So I was behind my classes, and the university didn't like that, so I'm having problems there. And so what happens there is that we have the riots, of course, they got the buses are burned in Anniston, Alabama, and everything else, so everything's uproar. So I get a call from Aretha and them they having a special meeting. Buses were attacked and come in. And so I go to Retha's house, and all the members of CORE come in. And so the question was to deal with, to move on. So there was an issue there with the Jim Farm and them about continuing to ride. And then there was Diane Nash and others were at Fisk University to move the Freedom Rides on. And so on the other side of it, which is left out of the history, was this New Orleans core group, which was a very powerful group of young people. There were Rudy Lombard and Retha and all those people. And so they were insisting that the ride, they were having a battle with the national office. The ride's got to continue. And so they were trying to get a group of people to go to join the ride series. But at the same time you had some of the people on that bus that burned in Alabama who were beaten also in Birmingham were in very bad shape. And they couldn't get medical attention there. So they were trying to get them out of there into New Orleans, because New Orleans, there was a hospital called Flint Goodrich Hospital, which was connected to Dillard University, but that's where most of the black doctors operate from, because they couldn't operate from the white public hospitals, charity hospitals. So they were at this hospital called Flint Goodrich. So the idea there was, how are you going to get this out? So we were busy organizing, getting the doctors ready and trying to get them out of Birmingham into New Orleans. At the same time, there was a group being organized to go to join the rides. And Retha then were insisting that the rides would continue, so it's just as Diane Nash was on one end, they were on this other end here to do the same thing. So when they came in, I'm still sort of like, okay, I'm not going to go on this ride, because they were trying to get me to go. I wouldn't go. I didn't want to go. And so they see this carnage. I mean, when they get them into New Orleans off the plane and stuff like this. And so we had Xavier University, who allowed us to house the people there. And we got doctors for them and everything else. So then they had to call Retha and say, okay, it's time for us to move. And so I go to Retha's house. I am not going to go on this ride. So there's Doris, there's Jerome Smith, there's Alice Thompson, and Julian Bond and myself end up on the ride. But I didn't want to go, so they really challenged my manhood. Doris did again. I'm still trying to get this day, so I'm ready to follow Doris again.
You sure are.
And so I'm ending up now is we get on a train, we breaking on this, so everybody had to stop in Montgomery. They were trapped in the church. We trying to get to Montgomery, and so we do get to Montgomery. Get to Montgomery, and there are these all of these marshals and stuff like this around. And so it was chaos. I mean, burning. I mean, it was just total riot. So we're right in the middle of it. I'm there like, oh my God, why am I here? My mom doesn't know where I am. Anything like this is.
How did you get to Montgomery from New Orleans?
On a train.
So you guys took a train.
Train, right? And so Retha and them informed Kennedy and them, who was trying to. There's a group that Diane Nash was dealing with the federal government on this end, and Retha was on this end over here. So the end that was lost was this end over here with this powerful group of people. So you had two groups that were trying to move this ride. And so then doing that, so they knew that we were coming. So they had U.S. Marshals there at the airport, at the train station. That's another story, because when I got there, I really was not clear about where I was. But anyway, we got there, so we do this, and so we in this where my change come into the movement. I'm telling the story long because this is where it hits at. What got me into the movement. So we at Dr. Harris's house the night before the ride. We were trying to decide who's going to go, whether to go forward. I'm at this time is still there is I'm not clear about what I want to do, but I knew that getting out of that house is going to be a trouble here no matter what you did, because it was like surrounded. And so we're sitting there as Dr. King, Abernathy, Y.T. Walker, James Bevel, Diane Nash, and a bunch of young people. They were all there, and the elders were going back and forth. And so here's where the stories get all convoluted. One story that's out there is that Dr. King, cowered out. That's not true. I mean, I was there, right? He did not do that. And I'm not clear yet why people said that, except for the ongoing conflict they had with some people. But his thing was he had been arrested in Montgomery on a traffic violation. He was out on parole. And so they knew breaking his parole, he's got 6 months, automatic. He's going to get. So I was sort of torn between them. So the Abernathy and all of them were trying to tell King, you go to, you do more good out, So I was one of the people that I thought he'd be more good if he's out too, In fact, somebody's got to tell the story, and he was a good storyteller. And in my head it was, I said, I'm pretty good too. Maybe I ought to stay out too. That's another excuse for me not to get on this bus. So he had these things out there. So they were right in the senses. But it wasn't that he didn't want to go. He felt that he didn't want. He thought he was on the side of the fact is that we might need to call a moratorium, but he didn't want anybody to get hurt. Because there were people trying to kill us. There wasn't anything, fake about this. So. It was dangerous. So that was one concern you had with the elderly people is. And King was in between. But then King did decide, okay, if you're going to go, I'm going to go, And so, but that was a controversial area. So finally convinced that King not go. And so they decided, all right. But anyway, during this discussion and everything else I'm sort of, do I go, do I not go? I was not committed yet. And so, and then just out of the blue, somebody made this statement. I don't know the day is. Whenever I ask people about it, no one about it. I said, I don't remember hearing that. And I said, I do. So somebody said in there, there's not enough space in this room for both God and fear. So make your choice. Right? So at that time, I was rather a religious guy, stuff is. And I'm like, boom. It was like, like lightning hit. So that was it, And so I volunteered for being on the first bus and going out there and so there's no turning back. So that's how I really got me. So it's a long trip. And to give you an idea how that moved, when I talked about this guy who was with me at Southern Lab, Hubert, really was H. Rap Brown. That's my classmate. And so we both was like, into this whole, life goes round, back again is, I know we had our class reunion and we've been voted as both unlikely to do what we did, because we weren't, and we just played, life was sort of that kind of piece for us. But that's, I just wanted to give you how fate sort of moved me into this whole thing. It wasn't one about my, my parents were, civil rights workers and blah, blah, blah. My grandmother did this thing my grandfather had his stands I could talk about. At that time but it had to do about being human, more or less is. And, but mine was just like, it's almost as if this is what you meant to do, and so things kept getting in the way to make sure you do it. Well, that was a good interval piece. When I got out jail, we got out a little bit early because Corps wanted us to raise money and recruit more volunteers to go jail piece. So I was pretty much made. I went back to Dillard, it was around test time and they politely asked me, told me that I should, to move on. So, I can't say they expelled me, you had a choice. Well, they made it clear that you're not going to be able to pass these tests anyway. So, well, it was there. I knew it was happening because it happened to everybody else before me, the difference could have been is that Dillard was a private school, but it was Xavier, Rudy was there. He wasn't thrown out, and he was very active in the movement. But another place, you're right. But I learned later on, what the psychology around that, what that was all about. And so that's another story, which we really, my work now is with a lot with HBCUs, but I have a much better understanding about how this sort of culture was developed among the state, especially state-run institutions, HBCUs. And that had to do with the fact is that the pathway to freedom for Black people has always been the right to vote, citizenship, and educational and read write. Because in order to be able to have the right to vote, you have to be able to read write. And so so what we had was that the first schools, public schools in this country were created by ex-slaves, beginning in this area around, Savannah, Penn Center, coming on through here and on into Orangeburg, you know, the key areas in terms of the beginning of public education is now into New Orleans, right? So public education in this country really started by ex-slaves, free slaves. And so what happened here is, on a large scale, when they started talking about the Institution for Higher Learning, HBCU started, it was really stayed on. So the presidents that people had, they were actually more like working for the state, the largest in this. So the whole thing was get an education, right? The whole Booker T, Du Bois argument. And so you got to talk about getting an education here is primary. So what they did was, in order to protect that, because they felt that the whites could take it away anytime. So we just interested in getting our people how to learn how to read and write and do arithmetic, right? And so so that culture began to exist there. Is how you preserve that and protect. Similar to the black men telling the black boys, okay, this is how you survive. So here's how you survive this all that piece around education. But the culture didn't change with the students. The culture around the students want to do something. The leadership did not change in the start of their culture. They was all like the same mold coming out of it, like the Clarks and others, something a place like that. So I think that's had a lot to do with that history, what happened there. And that's changing now. You're getting a lot of young, energetic and visionaries. Now we're heading up these institutions like Ron Mace at UDC. You got people. Cleve Sellers was at Voorhees. And you had Kimbrough at Dillard University now. So people like that you got around in the area. This whole education pieces. I stayed a little in New Orleans. Then I went back to Shreveport and began to organize there. In Shreveport there was a mentor there by the name of Dr. C.O. Simpkins, who was my dentist, who was also one of the leaders in the 50s around voter registration stuff. He's still alive, 93 years old in Shreveport. And he and Reverend Blake and some other people in that area there is really organized. They were part of the whole group with Reverend Jemison, the first boycott with Montgomery copied off, which was largest out of Baton Rouge, was in the 50s and stuff. And they were the original founders of SCLC, this group of people, into New Orleans and stuff. And so that began to organize there. So that was rough. Shreveport was tough. So that got my really feet wet there. Churches being bombed and stuff. There's other hidden story. Then right outside Shreveport was Jonesboro. Was the big end for protection. The people there, it was the beginning of the Deacons for Defense, the Jonesboro, then the Bogalusa, Louisiana. So we were all in this whole thing with CORE and pieces. Then students walked out in 1961, the end of 1961 in December, and Baton Rouge, Southern University, we were part of that, organizing pieces. I went to jail there about middle of December, stayed through until part about middle of January. So my Christmas, New Year's there is, and we had all the students were kicked out, Southern again is, and we ended up at the Lincoln Hotel, and then in January, right after that we got out. This is how we snaked again to cross this whole thing, connection with New Orleans, with Mississippi. Bob Moses and them were in Macomb, Mississippi, doing some demonstrations and also voter registration workers. Bob had gone into there with the snake. What I did not know is, at the meantime, before he did that Bob Moses had passed through Shreveport, because Ella Baker had given them names of leaders around in both Louisiana and Mississippi to talk to. One of them was Dr. C.O. Simpkins. So he was right in Shreveport. We didn't know each other then. Didn't come in contact. We found that out later just by talking to each other. So Bob and Dion Diamond and Chuck McDew and some of the other SNCC people came into Baton Rouge to try to recruit some of the students we had. So that was my first introduction to Bob. And we began to talk about what's going on in Mississippi, and then
Early 1962.
This would have been January 1962. In February 1962, he came back. And so I began to really have look at the direct action sit-ins as being, this is not going to do it. We're in the wrong track. And so there's Bob and them doing this work in Mississippi around the political issues. And then Corps had this elderly guy by the name of Jim McCain. And Jim McCain was from in Sumter, South Carolina, who was one of the organizers. There was also September Clark and all that crowd here, right? And so Jim was there. He would work with the NAACP. He was actually at one time principal of Branch High School up there in Sumter, peace around. And he worked with the Delane family at that first peace group, right? So Jim was talking to me also. He was the one of the coordinators of Corps. In fact, it's one of the first Corps meeting I went to New Orleans. He was there at that meeting because he was the one to organize the Corps. But he had been doing this stuff with the unions and around education a lot. And so his thing was, you know, you need to get into the whole political scene. You want to see some direct action, you get in that. You know, white folk ain't gonna let you do that. Well, if Doris had belonged to the Ku Klux Klan, I'd probably end up being a member of the Ku Klux Klan at that time. I mean, I didn't know the difference between Corps, SNCC, or anything else. And in fact, I don't think SNCC had been organized then, put together then. You think what the SNCC was, came in 1961.
1960.
60, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Right.
Just to,
Right, they had the meeting at Shaw University. So
right.
I became aware of those people when I became started going to the Corps meetings. You know, a lot of people in the Corps group had some relationship with the people in Nashville and Atlanta and others. So I would hear names. You know, my first meeting with a lot of those people was when I ended up at Dr. Harris's house for the Freedom Ride piece, because a lot of them were there. And I heard of people like James Bevel, Diane Nash, I heard about. But here I am, and there's all these people, you know. Yeah. I mean, I was just overwhelmed, number one is, but at the same time, I thought they were all crazy. You know, they were talking about dying and everything. I was not ready to die, and at that time, it was whatever happened to that voice, you know, that came out of there. But that's what got me going on that piece. But that's how. Then when Bob and them met. And so then at the same time the Corps was still pushing the Freedom Rides. They would continue the Freedom Rides. So most of the Freedom Rides are being trained by the New Orleans Corps Group. And so the New Orleans Corps Group would begin to spread out through Louisiana, you know, and some parts of Alabama. They went to Alabama and stuff. They had not gone into Mississippi yet, except for Tom Gaither, who had been put there by Corps to help continue to monitor and coordinate the Freedom Rides. So people getting arrested, stuff like that. But Tom Gates and Bob had become close friends. And so in the meantime, Tom Gaither gets drafted around April of 1962. And so I asked Corps, I'm ready to move on into Mississippi. I've gotten attached to and talking to Bob and watching what was going on. And so Corps, we have made a deal with Corps. They say, okay, if you want to go take Tom's place to deal with the Freedom Ride stuff is. So I really told him a lie. I told him, sure, I had no interest in the Freedom Ride stuff. I just want to get into Mississippi. So once I got to Mississippi, I was there for about a couple of weeks or so. They sent another bus load of kids in to go to jail there, and I forgot all about it. I was up in the Delta. Yeah. So people looking for me. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. So they finally had to send somebody else in to do that work. So that's how I got caught up in the Mississippi in April. And from there, it just then I guess about the May or June, I think it was. I've forgotten whether it was in 1962. The whole COFO thing was there. But COFO had already been organized before I got there. COFO was organized in 1961 by Ams and Moore and Dr. Aaron Henry, Medgar and others. And it was really put together there to help support the Freedom Rides. And so when Bob and them and Tom Gaither had a couple of meetings in there, talked about trying to figure out how to do, keep these organizations, move this to voter registration campaigns. So the voter education project had come together. There was some money being put together to help support, for the Ford Foundation, others to support a voter registration drive in Mississippi. Not too many people was for that because they didn't think they don't get, that much for the buck because of the difficulty of getting registered. And so Bob and I got there, had that conversation going there. So we had the meeting with Aaron Henry, and they want to meet again. And so we want to know if we can set up an arm, a political arm of COFO. And so a lot of stuff you see written up says Bob and I, were directors of COFO. That's not true. We were directors of this political arm of COFO. COFO had already been there,
Can you tell us what COFO
It's called, Council of Federated Organizations. So it was really where they brought together all of the civil rights groups and all the groups in the city, in the state, NAACP, SCLC, and all of them, to work together, but they actually did support the Freedom Rides at that time. Provide clothing, food, parents coming in, and whatever you can support it, and try to raise money for bond and stuff. Then you had the black lawyers there, Carsey Hall, Jack Young, who were part of that, with the legal aspect of it. And so we expanded that to put this committee together. And so that was then that's when we began to map out this plan of work of doing this massive attack on Mississippi. The SNCC people coming from all over the place. And he had the connection was with the two organizations. CORE had a PR person group working on the Marvin Rich as a national office there in New York. And SNCC had that communication piece out of Atlanta that was really headed by Julian. And so my contact with Julian was through this. Before I met Julian, I knew of Julian.
How did you hear of him?
Well, through SNCC people talked about Julian. This was their person. So you had, we were doing field reports and things of that nature. So you had to do these articles, write-ups, and whatever you had. So the way COFO set up was that the idea was that and this is what we did. I did myself is that when we got in trouble with the national office, both Bob and all of us did. SNCC and CORE just sort of went out the window, organization-wise. We were really, I know myself, and all the CORE people went COFO. And so although we were CORE, we got a lot of flack from the national office, and I speak more about from CORE, is that, they felt they were losing their identity, was not getting enough credit for the work that's being done there. So we kept talking about, so that's how in this, the decision was made is, okay, let's get everybody off our back is we had a lot of the CORE people, which had come from, most of the CORE people came from New Orleans, CORE. Then you had some coming in, that was Ed Hollander, who worked with Marvin Rich, who did a lot of PR stuff he came out of DC. And then you had a couple, Dick Jewett was out of California and some other people from around, but most of them came out of Louisiana, to the CORE people from that CORE group. So the first piece that they were constantly began to focus on at the early 1963, early part of 63, was the 4th Congressional District. It was Canton, Mississippi, and stuff that area is Philadelphia, where you have this. And so we decided, what Bob and I decided to do was, okay, let's tell CORE that they got the 4th Congressional. That's CORE, and the rest stayed around. But it actually was just for us, it was paper in the sense that's what people were. But we had CORE people all over the place, So you had a large contingency of CORE people, much more than looks in the history books about it, because we got folded into we just called ourselves COFO. I think we were. When we did the 50th anniversary, it was a surprise to me as we came out with counting the people that you could really identify with CORE. You had about 60, and that's not counting those who, volunteers. These are just people that had that identity, with the CORE pieces. So you have what you call CORE field workers, and then you have the same group like with SNCC. So SNCC people you had them coming from all over the place too, but you had a lot of them from like Hollis Watkins and others, right there from Mississippi. Mississippi had a large contingency of Mississippi. A lot of them came from other places, Frank Smith and others, Charlie Cobb. But Julian's piece is that I knew of. So what we did was we were writing up these reports for newspaper stuff So. And so I had conversation with Julian, on the phone, and with Marvin Rich and others, so we trying to get the stories out and stuff And then Julian began, then I forgot, I can't tell you what day it was when when I first met him, I met him in Mississippi, he came to Mississippi.
Was it 62 or 3 or?
It had to be in 62, but I'm not sure as to exactly when it is, because we were being arrested there, but Jim Foreman was in a lot, you know, people like that is. So the SNCC had and a lot of the SNCC meetings were being held in Mississippi then, coming into 62, in 62, 63, coming into 64, definitely. It was strictly at the very beginning, strictly professional. I mean, most of the people, except the people that were actually in Mississippi pieces, outside of that it was more on a professional level. Like Jim Foreman and others, I knew them, but we didn't actually socialize a lot, because it's busy. We ended up, we didn't have cohorts of people like, SNCC people stuck together, core people stuck together. We all just one big family. Okay. And so the family was more connected to what we had on more of a local level. Now we had my first wife was actually a SNCC field secretary, Maddie Bivens. She was with the Bivens out of Hattiesburg. And so that's how I met her. In fact, is the meeting that we had in Clarksdale around COFO. It's my first meeting with her because she came up with Bob Moses and them. And I met her at that meeting, on the way to they picked me up in Jackson and rode in the car. But
thank God Doris wasn't there.
Who?
Doris.
No,
So you got Doris out of your system at this point.
Well, Doris had got me out of it.
There was nothing to show
Doris, what Doris kept coming around is we actually became very good friends, and we was like almost like sister brother, Then it was like, yeah, it was out of my system. Then but we became very, very close. In fact, I never did date her. We just hang out, stuff like that. It was a Doris who really had not been a Doris. I mean, people ask me all the time about the why core not SNCC or whatever it is on this stuff is, and I tell them the same thing as this. I mean, if I didn't go to the meeting because of my belief was, I wasn't drawn by the organization, and so we have these discussions about SNCC, core, SCLC, and others, and people like that is, I take the position is that my relationship in the movement, goes to connections with core. But really, the core didn't make me, and SNCC didn't make Bob, or Julian and anybody else is. I mean, they made the organization. So it was all about the human beings, people. So it was not difficult for me to shed off and for other core people. That's why we have, there's a lot of pressures on me and a couple other people to, why don't we tell the core story? We don't do, that's not like a core legacy group or whatever you have is. And the reason why you can't get them to talk. I mean the key, like Matt Suarez and others who did so much in the movement, you talk to them about Rudy. Rudy died a couple of years ago. He never got his, story, all these people. And they'll tell you right off, hey man, I did my thing, That's it, I mean, I don't know what to talk to people about it. And a lot of people, I think it was very painful to talk about. It's not easy to talk about it. So we didn't live by the organization per se. We were all hooked together as individuals. So right now is that with my work that I did every conference SNCC has, always has had, I'm there. They invite me, hey Dave, we're gonna do this. Or can you help us put this together? I work very close with the SNCC Legacy Group at Duke, people like that. They're there with them, Charlie and all of them, Portland. With the Algebra Project, we're all still together there, the whole piece is because they don't look at me as core.
These are the people that led me to you. So you have either them to thank or blame.
Yeah, but I'm gonna do the latter.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Just kidding. But one thing I wanted to say about Julian and I became close, really more after the movement.
Okay.
We were.
What was your initial impression of him?
Oh, Julian, I was always very impressed. He was the intellectual person, in the movement pieces. He was this writer. He's the person who carried the message. I didn't expect Julian. We had people in places. I didn't expect Julian to be part of direct action. He didn't see that as his job. He didn't see that as where he could make the best contribution to it. So he didn't try. He would go in to get the story. And his job was to get the story out. So Julian would be there, and, I remember him being at some of the rallies or what we have is a demonstration and stuff is being announced. And so, but after the movement, when I say after the movement, when I got out of the movement per se, is directly out of it, when I left Mississippi and stuff, is then communication with Julian was on a different level. So we began to hang, and talk to each other and everything else is, and meet up with each other from time to time and stuff. And so we talk a lot, we did things together. So we became, friends after that piece. But during the movement, he was the PR person, and I sat meetings with us, but that was like a lot of people. You had these different relationships. You didn't have time for much more. I don't remember from 1961 up to 1965, I don't remember ever taking a vacation. So my first vacation after that was in 1965, and Rudy Lombard and I stole his brother's car and took off and went to New York and DC and stayed for about 3 weeks in his brother's car. And that was my first vacation in that whole period of time. We just hung. I mean, we just did crazy stuff all over the place. And that was 1965. And he was a deep thinker. I mean, his ability to translate what was really going on in the movement, what the movement's all about, is from a different level. You had those people who could talk from the point of view of the Kings and the Abernathy, stuff like this. But to translate to people, the McLaurens and the others, and the Hollists and others that really, no college background, no things, but the day-to-day grit and the grind and of the movement, and be able to translate that to the fact that it caught the imagination of the country and the people. I mean, Julian had that ability to do that. So he really was able to translate and bring the movement to the country, in a way that the country could really see it, I think, and understand it, and could feel it. So you didn't have many people who could do that, around the movement. But he and this little group, Mary King and others, they had this ability to do this stuff. So I think his ability to do that had his way of being able to. See, people trusted Julian. So you sat and you talked to Julian, and you have to worry about the fact is that he's going to take it out of context and put something out there that you didn't want out there, shouldn't be out there, but also at the same time be able to express what you're trying to say in a way. And it made no difference. I mean, you could be in a room with the highest level of authority, and in a room with as grassroots as you can get. In the same room with them and be the person who could really manage a conversation whereby everybody had a part in that conversation. All right, you could facilitate that and at the same time be one to be able to bring them together, the voices together. So that's unique. We don't have anybody able to do that. And he was that way able to do that until he died, because if you look at that's the reason why he was so popular around with people doing documentaries, because his ability to, like he says, voice was his piece.
A lot of people used to think that Julian was kind of patrician. And I know Julian well, but my first recollections of Julian was a poem I read that he wrote. Had to be in the early 60s. Look at that girl, shake that thing. We all can't be like Martin Luther King.
Right.
Yeah. Pretty much as expressive, being able to talk to people in the street.
Yeah.
Being able to talk to people in the streets.
Right. Exactly right. Yeah. No, he was good. So we after we spent a lot of time together. I mean, because I was, when I was in law school, I used to meet over there, just go to Atlanta and see, we meet in New York, something like that is. And after that is
66.
No, I went back to school in 65.
Okay.
And finished up at Dillard in 68. Went to law school in 68 and finished that in 71. So all during that period of time and definitely afterwards, So we remained pretty close, to We didn't, we weren't together all the time, but talk, phone, whatever you have is, run into each other all the time in airports. It was like crazy.
Yeah.
One place to the other. But the yeah, he was that type of individual, though. That's very personal.
Yeah. Well.
They were a little bit different, but there was only one Julian Bond, the background pieces. But you have people like Charlie Cobb. Charlie is similar type background. He's still there, and he's still the and he and Julian were pretty close too. But he's like the voice, not to a large extent, is what you see. There was Rudy Lombard and others, coming in with that type of background and being an African American. So I won't say that I was surprised at that, but you have to say, in one sense, when you talk about the in that context. But you have to always separate Julian. Julian was special. I mean, there is no comparison to the exact. He just stands out here. You can say, there are journalists. You got people with similar type background but he took it another level. So, and you have the Charlie Cobbs and other people now a Charlie Cobb, but Julian was special. He had his own space.
But when you say that at that point in time of the Black community, although there were maybe skin distinctions and some types of class distinctions, that the community at large was more together than it is now. You have the leadership all in one place and not being over here or over there in different communities. The community was a little bit.
Well, you actually you had then real communities. Where Black people live, Now you have places where Black people live. So you don't have real, what you call, communities anymore. So you talk about take a village to raise a child, that you don't have them. So that's one of our major problems is, you had, the teachers lived down the street, the businessmen, the doctors, the lawyers, you could see them, and you got these things going. You don't have that anymore. They all over the place, scattered around. And where you have the groups of Black people living together, they're just places. They're food deserts. There's nothing there, and they're forced to look at each other as enemies, which is really a reflection of how they feel about themselves, And so that's what we're trying to change now. How do you bring back the concept of community to us? So when Julia and them grew up, even his parents and other people like that is really, it was another type of community. So as we moved, even in the movement pieces, you had these that continued was this community of movement people. So the you want to call them snake people, whatever it is, but core snake, but the community movement people. So in Mississippi, when we put together the veterans group, that was the idea. We didn't want to call them core, we didn't want to call them SNCC, we call them veterans, so everybody who participated, because a lot of the local community people, what Julian meant about this, the local community people didn't give a darn what your organization you were from, in fact, I don't care which organization you're from, you out there trying to do some work in Mississippi in those days, you were called a freedom rider. So that was their relationship to the movement. They were freedom riders who come here, They didn't call them SNCC, and they didn't care whether you SNCC, whatever, because we really want to talk about a civil rights organization that paved the way. It really was the NAACP. That's where your real heroes came into it. They were in there doing the battle without you had no publicity, anything else like this. And when we got to Mississippi, there's no such thing as the fact that SNCC started the movement, the Corps started the movement, thing like that. Medgar Evers and them had, Ams and Moore and, those people at C.C. Bryant, and they were like doing it undercover, but they paved the way. If we had jumped in there talking about, we've been dead, and they protected us, It hadn't been for the Deacons for the Defenses, we've been wiped out in Louisiana. They saved us, They don't get any credit for it, We come out talking about, waving this flag. Julian understood that. You know, I mean, he was a PR person for SNCC. He did that, but Julian understood the dynamics of what was, you know, the movement. The movement was of people, not the organization. Yeah, well, Julian had the. I mean, that's when I talk about the fact is able to connect, you know, with people across the board. Is I mean, he could move from one level to the next. All right, and so they looking at Julian. You know, they looked at Julian as, I guess, the journalists looked at him as a journalist. You know, I mean, who had really insight, connections to, and respect of the people in the movement. You know, so he brought the truth of that piece out there. Well, he was a journalist, you know. And then civil rights people looked at him as not just as a journalist, but they looked at him as part of the movement. You know, people is. And then his ability to relate to people in the community is, when he was there, they felt he was connected, you know, although they felt that he was here, you know, but he's always part of the community and the family there too. So you have this, when you talk about this whole community idea, what we had then is that, see, the strength of the movement was the concept of the extended family concept of us, black people. So the extended family piece is we looked out for the children growing up. We were the children of the community, right? So the civil rights movement is a move. We had all these young people out there, you know. I got involved in the movement. I was 20 years old, right? You know, so at 21 years, you know, I'm telling people to go places and do things. I mean, you know, I'm going to jail and stuff. You know, by the time I'm 25, so 26 years old is, you know, I'm like, you know, I've been arrested almost 30 times, you know. But I'm young. We all young. But we were protected by, we were still looked upon as being the children of the community. So in Mississippi and stuff, like, they house, and they always say about it, oh, we're going to take care of the children, you know. Those freedom riders coming in, the crazy children, we're going to take care of the children. We're going to find a place for them to sleep. We're going to find a place for them, you know. And so we would walk around there knocking on doors. We might not got them, might not was able to get them to go down to register to vote. You know, we'd be like, we got 5 or 6 per month, you know, in some areas. But you have the relationship, you know. You know, when we would be hungry, stuff like that, we had a plan. We go knock on doors after 5 o'clock, you know. Because somebody's gonna be cooking some fried chicken and some biscuits. I say, hey, honey, child, you look hungry. Come, we all weighed 130, 40 pounds at that time. And so it's a difference. You know, you're right. There's a difference in terms of where we were then and where we are now. You know, which is very interesting. But in terms of what helped us in the movement was to have a person, a unique person like a Julian Bond is, to be able to translate and move the story to the country in a way that they could see it and feel it, you know. So
move it out of the South too.
Exactly right, you know, and people listened to him, and he would have the connection and stuff like that. Julian could get on the phone and say something is happening, they believe you, and the press would move, you know.
The Watts line.
The Watts. No, the whole idea of what we were doing in the movement was to, at that time, was pushing for black people to run for office and being organized politically, how you support that is. You know, we weren't just looking at political positions, but also, you know, like moving to the Democratic Party, how you get delegates and all this stuff like this. So we're getting very heavy. So yes, you were pushing. So therefore, we knew we couldn't win, you know, R.L.T. Smith in Mississippi and places, and we were doing that across the South, running black people, because that was an organizing tool. So it wasn't a surprise that Julian, that he would run. Surprise is winning, right? I wasn't involved in it, but I was following it. But I was not surprised. That is, when he was an effective journalist, because the fact is, a lot of times he did a lot of backroom stuff, you know, and so he knew how politicians operated and stuff is. I mean, because Julian could get into that, you know. So I wasn't surprised. Personally, I wasn't surprised about Julian, about running. I guess people with different opinion. I was watching from afar. I was communicated. No, I did not. Not about that. I mean, I knew that was going on as I was in discussion with other people, you know, but I wasn't directly involved in that. But I was not, none of that surprised me in terms, I mean, Julian, no, I always felt that he, in one sense, he was a very effective politician. I mean, you know, he's a journalist, everything movement. He knew how to get things done, you know, but that's the kind of arena he operated in, you know. He got the stories out. You know, he could not come out being, you know, this, you know, Black Power, you know, image. He was the image of a person who was involved in the movement. On the side is to tell the story. So that's the way I looked at it, you know. I mean, in my relationship with him about it. That is, I wasn't surprised at all. If anybody was going to do it and make it on that political ladder, you know, to me, in my head was Julian. I didn't see Julian. Julian was not the person who was going to be out there sitting in or, you know, carrying a picket sign per se, you know. I mean, I could see him playing this role. And to me, that's the most effective. It fit him perfectly, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, his voice was there. It kept him in a good position where he could be heard and listened to. And that's key. Because, see, a lot of people have a lot to say. But it's the way you say it is whether or not you're going to be heard. So you can talk all you want to, and people not listening to you.
But wouldn't you think that his fame or people's regard for him was more connected to Julian Bond going after the man with the axe handle than all the other the civil rights bills being passed and his involvement in the struggle? Just on the street level, people understood the representation between the pickaxe and Lester Maddox and Julian Bond.
I don't know. Maybe so. You know, I mean, I have to speak personally. I can see that, baby, but you know, because when you got outside the movement, people on the street didn't know Julian Bond. It wasn't like something that was word the streets were.
I'm from Spartanburg.
Yeah.
And as a young kid growing up, that was the symbolism in my brain.
Gotcha.
Julian in the state next to me.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, but mostly, you know, what was the names that were recognized on the streets were, you know, Stokely, H. Rap, you know, and that kind of, you know, Malcolm, you know, what you had. But that's, I mean, I might have been, you know, yeah, I can't say no to it, but I would see him as, yes, he did that. I mean, you got but I don't think that's what was stood out in the country. That might be, you know, at the time, I'm not sure. I couldn't say. What made Julian, you talk about his voice, his pen, you know, and there are these other things that they was into, you know, did, you know, and people say, yeah, he did. But it's really his voice and his pen. And his ability to communicate and move in the different circles and bring it together, you know. So he was much more effective in my opinion. You got the action, right? You know, so the action is there, but his ability to take the action and move it to about across the country where people could hear, understand it, and get the meaning of what that was done which really made the difference in the movement. And so to me that's what people knew what Julian rep is to the largest extent around the country, I felt. I mean, that's why you picked up the more important documentaries that's done in the country is there's Julian Bond who's translating, dealing with it.
Yeah, there's.
You know, so you don't see the axe handle. You know, I mean, you see right? And I mean, that's what I mean by the fact is that people listen to him. So it doesn't mean you have to talk all the time, right? I mean, but when you did talk, people listened to you. And so that's what he brought to the table, his ability to do that. So his ability to, when he talked, so he was able to move the movement of the action and activity from where it was to, across the country and to people and to the different people, different groups.